What's up, friends? Thank you so much for tuning in to the Be Less Unfit Performance podcast, YouTube show. You're going to notice over the course of these videos that, I've changed a lot. I filmed these over the course of 2 years. So as my life changed, you see my body change. 1. 2, I changed the way I was going to use these videos. They were going to only be an add-on to the program. Instead, I wanted everybody to be able to have this great information, and so now they're live. If you have any questions or want to know more about the Be Less Unfit program, please head over to sampogue.com or belessunfit.com to learn more and check it out. In the meantime, please enjoy this amazing show and learn more about our guests by going down to the comment section bio area and click what they have going on. I'm so blessed that they said yes to helping me out, and I want you to go learn from them as well. So enjoy the show, have a great day, and please remember to subscribe. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the BLF webinar podcast thing. What we're doing here is we're breaking down the components of the BLF program and breaking them into digestible information chunks for you guys to understand the why behind you doing them. Whether that's strength training, body weight training, mindfulness practice, sunlight, walking, whatever that might be, I want to provide you context with the best of the best in the industry and where they see their expertise and how do they apply it to someone who's brand new on their journey. As you guys are going to notice in your program, each day is completed with a breath work piece. And I know taking a few breaths might seem really weird or arbitrary to some of you, but there's a lot of powerful things that happen when we breathe. And that's not just keeping us alive through oxygen and carbon dioxide, but actually there's a lot of things that happen to our emotional and physiological state. So I'm sitting down here with my buddy PJ Nestler, performance coach, head of education performance for XPT Life, and just an incredible human being talking all things about our breath and how it helps us going forward and developing better healthy habits, not only in our personal lives, but expanding on our performance and our abilities to live the lives we all want to live. PJ, thank you so much for taking some time just to chat with me.
My pleasure, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Go ahead and give everybody a quick rundown. What is it that you do? How did you get into a spot where you're teaching people how to breathe correctly? And where have you seen this translating into your professional athletes to everyday people? And why does it matter?
Yeah, sure. I got into this from my background in the industry is in sports performance and strength and conditioning. So I spent the first 12 years of my career training athletes at all different levels and working with a lot of the later years of my career, working with a lot of collegiate and professional athletes. And I got actually involved in breathworks maybe 5 years ago. I was working with a lot of MMA fighters, jiu-jitsu fighters, and football and hockey players at the time. And I had a friend who was a performance coach, but also was very into breathwork practices. And she came and taught me some stuff that she came and taught me a whole bunch of things. I was a little overwhelmed by it. And to be honest, I only bought into about 10% of it because I was a skeptical performance coach. But the things that I bought into, I really enjoyed. I know you mentioned there's some recovery breathing at the end of the workouts. And that was one of the biggest takeaways I had originally. And I started implementing into my sessions with my athletes. And I started seeing, number one, they felt a lot better when I started incorporating that. And number two, we were seeming, and I wasn't collecting data on this, but we were seeming to have better recovery from day to day. My athletes just felt better the next day because I worked with professional athletes and MMA fighters, jiu-jitsu fighters are habitually overtrained. They live in an overtrained state year round. So anytime you can find little ways to get them out of their overtrained state and get them to recover and relax and just kind of boost that recovery process, that's obviously one of the biggest things. And so that's when I started incorporating a little bit of breath work into my training. And then fast forward a few years later, I started transitioning more into education. I started running workshops and seminars and teaching mentorships, teaching coaches and trainers. And I got connected with this company, XPT, where I met up with Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese, who are the co-founders. And breath work is a huge component of what they do. It started as, Laird Hamilton being a iconic big wave surfer. When you're getting held under 100-foot waves, you become very connected with the breath really quick. So I think a lot of people become connected with the breath because they realize how important it is when they don't have it. And that's
Yeah.
really from a general person perspective. We don't really think about the way we breathe unless we have asthma, we get sick, or we're exercising and we're out of breath, or someone's holding us underwater. And then those are the only times we ever really become connected with the way we breathe. So when I got involved with XPT, I started learning from Laird how much breathing was an important part of what they do, and how they use it way outside the scope of just holding your breath longer underwater. So my job with XPT was to take all of this amazing stuff that they were doing at these XPT retreats, which we call experiences, and develop that into a curriculum and a certification program that could be taught to coaches and trainers. So step one for me was to learn everything possible about breath so that I could understand it and then find ways to simplify it. And the really cool thing for me about it was our demographic at XPT is type A performance people. And the reason I pushed off the breathing 5-6 years ago was it came at me as like spiritual hippie yoga, and I wasn't into that. I was into, how can I improve athletic performance? I got guys who need to fight in the octagon for 25 minutes. So I need to figure out how I can make them do that better, not connect with their spirituality. And so I kind of excused all that stuff. And then when I started getting into the breath work, I started learning more about it. I spent about, now I've been with XPT for 2.5 years, but really my first 12 months was all breathing. I took like 7 different breathing certification courses. I flew all over the world to meet with experts. I read about probably 11 different books, 250 research studies on breathing. I really just immersed myself fully in everything I could about breath work so that I could understand it. And then the thing that I was excited about was my job was to try to communicate it to performance people. So when I started seeing how powerful this breath stuff was, and I started seeing what my friend was trying to teach me 6 years ago, but the presentation was in the wrong package, so I ignored it. I started to see the synergies, and I said, okay, this is awesome, because there was a lot of really powerful stuff, but it was just not packaged well for who I was. My job is now to package these things for the performance people, for the type A people that aren't meditators and aren't going to spend an hour connecting with the breath and all that. But how can I find ways to communicate this and simplify it for them so that they can experience the benefits of it, because they're pretty vast.
Mm-hmm. How did you, I get it, the skeptical strength coach, the woo-wee Eastern medicine style, like it doesn't have evidence base that supports every argument. How did you get yourself to buy in? Like, what was there a piece of it that was just like, okay, I can at least buy into that? Or, because I imagine most people that do this program will go in like, fucking breath work. Like, what do you mean I don't breathe well, right? So if we can convince the super scientific skeptical sports performance coach, what was it that sold you?
Yeah, the great part about XPT is the other parts of XPT are so challenging and stressful for most people that they teach you these lessons in breath and mindfulness and just mindset in general. And then they stick you in these situations that force you to use those tools. So for example, I'm somebody who, one of the limitations I had in my life, I was extremely claustrophobic. I could never get in an MRI machine. I had to be sedated. I couldn't, 50% of the time I was on an airplane, I would have little anxiety attacks, not full on panic attacks, but pretty close to panic attacks. It was a stressful situation. I avoided things that I thought were going to, even in jiu-jitsu, which is a passion of mine. If I ever ended up underneath somebody where I was getting smothered, I panicked, I freaked out. I just moved out of that position, put myself in a bad spot and would lose, but I would rather lose than be there getting smothered because I would freak out. So that was just something I dealt with for a long time. Day one at XPT, I met Laird Hamilton and got into his 220-degree sauna with him. And I sat there with 6 other people in this barrel, and I was claustrophobic right away. And it was almost, the claustrophobia is more of a fear of like, I can't get out of here.
Right.
So I knew I was sitting there face to face with Laird, and he wasn't going to get out anytime soon. So I couldn't get out. So I started panicking and freaking out there. Then we get out and we get into the 33-degree ice bath, where again, you immediately lose control of your breath. Your mind just completely shuts off and you go into fight or flight mode. And then I spent an hour and a half in the pool where we're doing all these crazy exercises underwater with weights and holding your breath. And I left that experience like feeling like I had just been physically and emotionally just beat down. And I realized that I had been pushed so far out of my comfort zone in the water and in the ice and in the sauna that I was like, man, this is crazy. I didn't even want to be a part of it. I was like, this isn't what I do. I train athletes. I don't want to be a part of this company with these crazy people trying to kill me. But when I thought about it and realized how far, I always prided myself on being someone who pushes themselves out of their comfort zone.
Mm.
I push myself hard in the gym. I train jujitsu. I train MMA. I do all these, I grew up playing combat or contact sports. So I always prided myself on that. And then what I realized was I never really was outside my comfort zone because those areas were my comfort zone.
Totally.
I can push myself really hard on an assault bike, but I know the limitations there. I'm not afraid. It's hard, but I never get real fear because I know what's physically possible. And I've trained athletes, hundreds of people doing those things. Whereas when you put me in the pool with 40-pound dumbbells in my hands, I have no idea what my potential is, what the limitations are, where my wall is. So I realized that was really on the edge of my comfort zone and it was pushing outside those boundaries. So anyway, fast forward to why this connected with me. I started learning the breathing, and the first thing I learned was connecting with the breath as a way of being mindful to remove your mind from the anxiety. So not even the physical sensations of breath, but just as a psychological anchor point to get out of the anxiety. And that was something that when being in the ice bath, if you want to survive that and stay calm in that situation, you have to be able to do that. Well, at least most people I've worked with, and I've had thousands of people do it now. So Laird taught me the breathing protocols to connect to that and just to focus on it. And I would just count the breathing as I was in there. And that was the only way I was able to kind of relax into it. And then when I started using that and then paired it together with some very simple protocols that are also designed to help decrease physiological stress, so bring you into a parasympathetic state. So we've got the mind getting out of this thing that's creating stress, which is the anxiety of the ice bath, let's say. And then we have the physiology, bringing the heart rate and the blood pressure down and bringing you into this parasympathetic state, and those two things connecting. So I was able to do that pretty quickly in the ice bath. And what I found was all of a sudden I was in there just focusing on my breath, just counting these things, and it was getting me through this. And not getting me through it, but they'd say time, and I'd go, oh, really? So that was pretty cool for me. But the real thing that made me jump into XPT, like I've worked for a lot of companies. I work for XPT, but XPT is how I live my life. And the thing that made me really buy in was I had to go do an MRI about 4 months into working with XPT, maybe 3 months into working with XPT. I'd hurt my back right when I started working with them. So I had to get an MRI machine, and I didn't want to get sedated. So I told myself, I can do this. I have these breathing protocols. I did this in the ice bath. I can do this. They put me in the MRI machine, and I closed my eyes and I did my breathing protocols. And I was in there for 26, 27 minutes, whatever it is. And I mean, the last time I did an MRI, they put me in 3 times and I kept pushing the button. They had to keep taking me out. Then they had to make me come back another time to get sedated. So it took 4 tries, finally getting sedated to actually get me through the MRI. And then this time I got through it. 27 minutes I was in there, and I almost freaked out every 2 or 3 minutes, but I was able to bring myself back to the breath, keep myself calm. And when I got out of that, I was like, wow, this is powerful. And then I started applying that to other things. I mean, I travel now twice a week for work. I'm on planes. I mean, now I'm going skydiving, where I was freaking out getting onto the plane because I was like, I wasn't even worried about jumping out. I was worried about the plane ride up in that little plane crammed in there. I mean, I was in Mexico last week, cave diving in these little spaces this big. And I look at pictures now, I'm like, that would have given me nightmares if I looked at that 3 years ago and thought I had to do that. And now I feel like I have the tools to get me through those things. So that's what made me such a true believer. And that was just one aspect.
Yeah.
But that's what made me just keep digging in, keep digging in, keep digging in. And then the more I uncovered, the more I practiced on myself and then incorporated with my athletes, and was like getting these connections with them and seeing these light bulbs turn on. And the more people I worked with or talked to, I was like, okay, this stuff is way more powerful than holding your breath because you're a surfer.
That's friggin' amazing, man. I love so much uncovering someone's story into what they are now known as being an expert for, because chances are it wasn't an easy journey. Because if it was, they wouldn't be where they are, right? Like, I love that there was like this, like, holy shit battle, the dichotomy between you and your own trials and tribulations to then now sharing it, and like how much more of a believer that do you sell this system of work because you're so passionate, because it's changed your life. Like, that's exponentially different than like, oh yeah, I teach for this thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about the physiology of breathing, and let's talk about like what's going on, because you're mentioning it in terms of jiu-jitsu, someone choking you out, or being an athlete on the field preparing, or being underwater with 40-pound dumbbells, sauna, steam room. But like, our bodies experience it in those ways. But the person who gets really nervous speaking in public, or going into a big board meeting for their company, or having a fight with their spouse, like those stresses, those physiological stresses occur the same way, whether you're in one of those situations or one of your situations. And so when we look at breathing, you know, when we look at like accelerated heart rate, we look at really fast, panicky breathing. But at the same time, too, we also sometimes stop breathing. Like, if I'm like really thinking about something, I have to go, oh shit, you're not breathing at all, right? So what's going on there? Why does stress fuck with our breathing so much? And what's going on when we're breathing?
So the way to look at breathing is really that breathing is designed to help deliver oxygen to the tissues and clear out carbon dioxide, generally speaking. And the reason we started breathing faster in stressful situations is because stress used to be anything that, you know, fight or flight. I needed to fight or run. So I start to breathe faster as my heart beats faster, so that I can provide more oxygen to the muscles, to the brain, to the organs, so that they can all do their job at a faster pace. And that's, you know, what we always say, increasing metabolic demand. As that metabolic demand increases, we need more oxygen, and we produce more carbon dioxide as a byproduct, because that's what gets produced as a waste product that we need to clear out. So really, like, my basics of respiration is to balance oxygen and carbon dioxide. That's why what happens with every breath we take. Fast forward to now, we have all of these other stressors that you mentioned that actually don't increase metabolic demand, but they trigger the same physiological responses in your body, because our body is designed to deal with that stress. So when I'm in a big meeting and I'm under stress there, my body reacts to that the same way as if I was having to run away from danger, or, you know, facing something that was a physical danger. And actually 99% of the stressors we face in modern society are psychological, but they trigger those same physiological responses. So that's where we create a lot of issues, because we didn't face that many dangers all the time from an evolutionary standpoint. You know, we sheltered ourselves in tribes and things so that we weren't constantly just running out and fighting every tiger that we could possibly find. So we only needed these stress responses for short terms to be, you know, crank everything up, all systems go in fifth gear, and then shut everything back down. But today we've got cell phones and emails and friends and Facebook and all this kind of crap that keeps us in this elevated state of stress. So as those systems start to crank up, our respiratory demand starts to increase as well. So that's one of the big things that we look at in breathing, and that's where it creates dysfunctions. And then the other area too is just the breathing mechanics. The way that we breathe, this is something I talk to a lot of people about, because the way we breathe influences how that breathing actually works, let's say. So it influences every system and cell in the body. The reason we breathe so often is because we have to be constantly balancing that oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's not like we could just take, you know, we're not like whales. We can take one breath and then go down for 45 minutes. We have to breathe. The average person breathes 10 to 14 times per minute. So we're breathing around 20,000 breaths per day. So we have to do that to constantly balance those gases out, because that's how the systems are going to work. They all need the oxygen and they all need to clear out the carbon dioxide, or if one of those is unbalanced, the systems will start to break down. If the organs don't receive the oxygen they need, they can't function. They'll start to break down. If the muscles don't receive the oxygen they need, everybody who exercises knows what that feels like. You start to produce extra waste products and produce lactic acid, and the muscles burn, and then all of a sudden they can't contract anymore and they spasm, and you get muscular failure. So but when it comes back to the oxygen being delivered, if we think about that as just a baseline for life, what I always tell people is that breathing, every single breath you take is either a step towards optimization or dysfunction. And in any area, whether that's sports performance or everyday life, because it's the most influential thing that we do from a life perspective. So you don't really have a choice to kind of stay in the middle, although most people think that's where they are, because if they don't have a respiratory dysfunction that's has been assessed by a doctor, then they think they're in the middle, unless they're a breathing expert, in which case they think they're in the optimization category. But the reality is most people are way down the dysfunction path. And another big reason for that when it comes to mechanics is we weren't designed to be doing this, sitting down. So we know as movement specialists that we had to spend a lot of time reconnecting people with movement, because the average American spends 13 to 16 hours a day sitting. So if we're designed to be up and moving, but we're spending 2/3 of our day sitting, we're going to start losing those things that we're not using regularly. And that one of those big things is breathing. When it comes to movement, breathing is such a dysfunctional pattern, because the structures that are designed to help you breathe and to do it the right way are being influenced by the way we sit, by our posture, by the muscles that can be activated. So then that leads us into these kind of faulty patterns. And then that creates dysfunction in our physiology, in our ability to balance blood gases. And then that creates dysfunctions in our psychology. And all of those things, we call it the 3-dimensional approach to breathing. And we didn't coin this term. This came from a Dr. Rosalba Courtney. She had a paper that she came out with. She talked about the 3-dimensional approach to breathing. And it was really for medical practitioners, but the reality is it's still not out there for medical practitioners. But they look at the biomechanical side, like the actual structures you're using to create ventilation, and then the biochemical, the balance of blood gas, of respiratory gases that I mentioned, oxygen and carbon dioxide primarily, and then the psychophysiological, how the brain is influencing breathing, and how breathing is influencing the brain, because the centers of the brain that control respiration are directly linked to the centers of the brain that control autonomic arousal. So our arousal, emotional arousal state. So I know there was a lot of pieces there, but that's why from a structural perspective, from a foundational perspective, it's so important to understand it. And I always say, like, if you're going to be doing it anyway, and it's tied to every single system and cell in the body, then why not start there as a foundation for health, for fitness, for performance, for longevity. I'm not saying that's the be all end all. It's not going to ultimately get you to where you want to be and make you win a UFC championship, but it's a great foundation to build on top of. So it's one of the most essential things.
That's freaking amazing. Guys, like, you guys know me in being in this setting, and I go to lectures and talks on fitness and health all the time. And I love that I'm constantly blown away by just the amazing content that's out there. And as you guys are experiencing through this program, the goal of this program is to simplify all these things, because, you've heard me talk about this. I get it. Health is hard. How the hell are you supposed to know what to believe? Do this, do that, do this. This is healthy. This is not healthy. And it's like, the goal of this is to narrow everything down into a couple baseline things that we can all take and run with. One thing I really want to touch on, I think was going to help a lot of people as it relates to breath, especially when we start talking about the cylinder and our mechanics. What are some of the common ailments? Like, people experience low back pain, neck pain, a lot of issues. And that's a lot of it's to do with our breath and our pattern of how we breathe. What are some of the common things or the common dysfunctions you see in this space for people who have poor breathing mechanics, and how are they triggered, or what do we see them as in everyday people?
Yeah, so I'll give you maybe a common dysfunction for each of those categories that I talked about.
Cool.
You mentioned a little bit of the neck pain, the shoulder pain. One of the most common breathing dysfunctions that I see from a mechanic standpoint is what we call vertical breathing or chest breathing, sometimes called paradoxical breathing, which is a little bit of a context. But really what that means is, if you think about the way that we're supposed to breathe, I mentioned the mechanics. We have a specific way that we're supposed to breathe. And we've got a structure on the bottom of our lungs called the diaphragm, a muscle, and it attaches to the base of the lungs. And then the lungs also attach to the rib cage, at the top of the rib cage. And if you think about the lungs like a little balloon inside your rib cage, in order to get air into that balloon, we've got to expand it. So there's a few ways we can do that. The primary way, the way we're supposed to, is by contracting the diaphragm. And as you contract the diaphragm, it pulls down and spreads out, and it pulls on the base of the lungs, pulling them away from the rib cage, and therefore expanding them, which brings air in. That also does a whole bunch of other stuff, like you mentioned, stabilizing the lower back, creating a platform of stability for the pelvis and the spine and the rib cage. There's a whole bunch of other really important functions of the diaphragm, but one of the primary functions is to create ventilation. So that's when you hear people say the term belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. Those are becoming more mainstream, which is awesome. I don't think a lot of people know what they mean, but they've probably heard it before at least.
Totally.
And that's what people are talking about. They're talking about using the diaphragm to inhale. But when it comes to, and when you do that, the diaphragm spreads out. It doesn't just go down, but it actually spreads out. So what you'll see when people breathe properly is they'll actually get expansion of the lower abdomen from the belly to, and this is why I don't use the term belly breathing that often, because it's actually a 360-degree expansion. It's not just our belly coming forward like making a beer belly,
right,
or a Buddha belly, because that could be a good way to get out of chest breathing. It's, you know, if people are doing that as step one, it's a great step one, because chest breathing is way worse than belly breathing. But belly breathing can also be a dysfunctional pattern. So I like to teach people, and I got this term from Dr. Belisa Vranic, who wrote a good book on breathing. She actually, I heard the term from her, vertical and horizontal breathing. But I think it's a really good, easy way to conceptualize it versus using the terms belly, which can be misleading, or diaphragmatic, which nobody knows what that means. So horizontal breathing just means when you inhale, you're expanding your lower abdomen horizontally, so 360 degrees around. Whereas vertical breathing is when you're actually lifting. So I mentioned the diaphragm pulls down. When we don't have access to the diaphragm, when we're not able to use the diaphragm as we're supposed to, well, our other option to expand the lungs is to lift the rib cage away from the diaphragm. And that's where we get that horizontal breathing. So it's where we lift, and then what we're doing there is we're using all these secondary breathing muscles. We're using our neck, the muscles in our neck and our traps and our upper chest. And all of those muscles are not designed to take 20,000 breaths a day.
Right.
So when they do, they become hypertonic, which means they're basically on all the time. And that can wreak havoc on the system, because they're not designed to do that all the time. It's like if you had a support structures for a house and you had these big, massive pillars that were supporting it, and then these little tiny extra support beams, and you knocked down the big pillars and you left all the weight just supported on these little beams. Well, eventually those things are going to bust because there's way too much weight on those. That's kind of what's happening with these accessory breathing muscles. And one of the big reasons for that is because we sit down all the time. It's really hard to breathe diaphragmatically when you're sitting, especially when you're sitting with poor posture. So that leads us into these upper chest breathing patterns. But if we are aware of it, we can correct it. The reason that, and Dr. Belisa actually did a study on children, and they found that the average age where the people start to lose function of their diaphragm is 5.5 years old. Which just so happens to correspond with about the time we start sitting down in school, is around 5 years old. So, but then from the time you're 5 years old, who's out there talking to 5-year-olds about breathing patterns or diaphragmatic breathing? Nobody, because no one knows. So you just go on the rest of your life never thinking about it. You create this compensatory pattern. I mean, the only reason most people are learning about fixing their posture is because they hurt their shoulder playing tennis. They went to their doctor, and their doctor said, well, you're all hunched forward. You got to do something to fix this. Until someone told them that, they didn't know that their posture was going to tear their shoulder apart playing tennis. So that's the same thing with breathing. And then you watch, I mean, if you watch TV, anytime you see someone take a deep breath, what do? They do this big mouth breath into the upper chest. So we're just, from a society standpoint, we're also reinforcing the same thing. So there's a lot of things that can trigger us to use these dysfunctional patterns, primarily this dysfunctional breathing mechanics, and we never relearn it. You know, if you sprain your ankle, you go to a physical therapist and they teach you how to, you start walking on it again so that you don't have a limp the rest of your life.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know this about breathing, so no one reteaches you how to breathe, and you don't practice it again. So you're just taking 20,000 dysfunctional reps that's going to just develop this as your new habit, and then you'll do it the rest of your life.
Yeah, 20,000 is a shitload of volume, right? Like, there's nothing in the world that you do that many times. And to think about, let's say, guys, if you did 20,000 bad squats, like your back is going to be effed, right? Yeah. So it's like you take 20,000 bad breaths, and you're a 60-year-old dude that's been sitting in an office for, you're like, of course your low back, your shoulders, your, everything hurts, right? Yeah. Everything's being forced that way because you don't realize that all these, like, if you do this and you breathe through your chest and shoulders and your traps raise every time, 20,000 times a day, yeah, of course your neck is going to be stiff as shit.
Yeah,
like,
and there's a lot of really good research showing that the great part and where you see the correlation, because that's the other challenge, is that when you go to the doctor as a 60-year-old with neck pain and low back pain, nobody says, well, let's take a quick rewind for the past 40 years and let's look at those 20,000 breaths a day that you took and see if that created this issue, and then we can fix it. They just say, all right, well, let's either give you some medicine or let's do some rehab for the neck or whatever. Let's treat the symptom or the current issue. But there's a lot of research now of people with shoulder pain, with low back pain, with neck pain, and the therapist, the only thing that they did was correct breathing patterns. Some of it was restoring diaphragm function through a really simple hands-on technique. Others were teaching them basic breathing techniques, but they've tied breathing where they corrected breathing patterns, never addressed the neck at all, and all of a sudden the pain went away just by restoring this foundation, by getting things back to normal. So if you're able to do that, then, again, that's why I say it's either optimization or dysfunction. I got this term actually from a guy that we work with, Dr. Lenny Wiersma, who's over at Cal State Fullerton. He's a sports psychologist, and he was talking about the mind, but I also took it and applied it to breath, which is your breathing can either be a weakness or a weapon. You get to choose which one it is. You can weaponize that system and you can optimize everything so it's in pushing you towards performing, or it can become a weakness that limits you. But there's no middle ground on that one.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big issues with breathing mechanics. And then you also mentioned we talked a little bit about the physiology side, the respiratory gases. That's another really big issue, because when we screw up respiratory gases, your body starts to adapt to low levels of either gas. So what happens is people start to overbreathe when they have poor breathing mechanics and patterns, and that leads to them lowering the carbon dioxide in their blood. So when people have low carbon dioxide, if you've ever hyperventilated on purpose, and if you want to try it out, just take 30 breaths like this and see how you feel at the end. Most likely you're going to be a little bit lightheaded, a little dizzy. What happened right there is you lowered carbon dioxide by breathing really fast.
Oh.
When carbon dioxide lowers, oxygen stays really high. But carbon dioxide has to be at a certain level in the blood for the oxygen to get released to all the tissues. So you have all this oxygen that's floating around in your blood, but it's not getting released to the muscles. It's not getting released to the heart and the organs. It's not getting released to the brain. And therefore, all of these things are getting starved of oxygen short term. But imagine if you did that 20,000 breaths a day for 40 years. A primary fuel source that helps your liver function, that helps your heart function, your brain function, your muscles function, helps all of these things function. You are not feeding it. You know, let's say you're giving it 20% less, and then you're asking these things to function at 100%, but with 20% oxygen or with 80% oxygen for 40 years. Of course, that's going to wreak havoc on those systems and it's going to create issues. So, you know, you'll see people who have chronic fatigue or lightheadedness. They feel dizzy, lightheaded. They feel out of breath in simple daily activities. A lot of that is because they have a dysfunction of over breathing, where they're just breathing more air than is necessary, which happens a lot when we breathe through the mouth, because the mouth's really not designed for breathing. So when people start to overbreathe, then we get this imbalance in respiratory gases, and that can, again, create just that simple dysfunction. Overbreathing has been linked to over 700 ailments, diseases, and illnesses.
Holy shit.
I've got a list from Dr. Klum Law, or something like that. Can't remember his name, but I have a list of over 700 things that were associated, ailments, illnesses, diseases, chronic diseases that were associated with overbreathing. That's how vital this is. I mean, the only other things I know of that have been associated with that many ailments and illnesses is sleep and, what was the other one I was going to say? Movement. Oh, sorry. Stress. Stress was the other one.
There you go. Yeah.
Stress. That you can find that are pretty much linked to all of these things. So those are some major dysfunctions. The good news is they're relatively simple to fix. You know, it's almost the most low-hanging fruit. If you have any of those ailments or any of those dysfunctions, people are like, "Oh man, now what do I do?" But it's not like a torn rotator cuff where you gotta, okay, well, it's going to cost you $5,000 to get the surgery, and then you got 6 months in rehab. I mean, it's such low-hanging fruit. I'm going to give you guys some tips that'll correct those two things and start correcting it today.
Yeah.
And little simple things you can do while you're sitting in your office, while you're at work. You don't even have to go to the gym to do it. You can literally do these things throughout, you know, while you're sitting in your car driving to work every day, and start, you know, optimizing these systems and getting out of these dysfunctions.
Go back to a point you just made a minute ago. You said the mouth is not designed for breathing.
Correct.
How many people are going to go listen to that go, wait, what? That's all this thing does, is it puts shit in. What do you mean? Expand on that thought for me.
Yeah, so the mouth really is designed for eating, talking, and as a backup system for respiration. Because the nose is as a structure. When I tell you some of the main things the nose does, you'll realize why the nose is designed for respiration. The nose helps filter and clean and humidify the air, so it prepares the air to enter our body. So I heard this term from Brian McKenzie once, and he was saying that the nasal breathing is like drinking filtered water. Mouth breathing is like drinking water out of a puddle or a lake.
I love that.
You're just taking in everything. You know, you go for a run. I just watched a guy run by my house, huffing and puffing through his mouth as I'm watching cars drive by. He's inhaling everything that's going on out there, all the fumes. It's all going in. There's no filter system. So that's one of the main things. But the nose also has a gas called nitric oxide that pools in the nasal cavity that helps balance blood gases, helps oxygen get delivered into the tissues and get picked up in the blood, and helps carbon dioxide to actually reach the lungs. So it helps balance blood gases out so that you can actually use that oxygen that you're inhaling. It also has a whole bunch of antibacterial effects. It has a lot of other positive effects, which of course you don't inhale that if you're inhaling through the mouth. The nose also helps activate the diaphragm. So we talked how important it is to breathe through the diaphragm. The nose activates the diaphragm.
Wow.
The nose also helps to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest state. And that's the one thing we didn't talk too much about so far, but I mentioned at the beginning, one of our main areas of being overstressed. When I say overstressed, I mean in a heightened state of sympathetic nervous system activity, which is our fight and flight state. Many of us spend too much time in that state, which wreaks havoc on every system in the body. Being in a parasympathetic state is more ideal, and breathing is a great way to do that. But one of the main triggers for parasympathetic activity, or one of the triggers, is nasal breathing. What else did I? Oh, and then the last one is it helps to regulate how much air goes in and out. So I mentioned over breathing in and out more air than is necessary as being a dysfunction. Nasal breathing creates 50% resistance to the air. So 50% more resistance than the mouth. So it's very, very, very hard to overbreathe if you're nasal breathing all the time. And if you look at other species, let's say use a dog, for example, dogs rarely breathe through their mouth. They only breathe through their mouth when they're finished running, they're super excited, or they're sick. That's pretty much the only times dogs will not breathe through their mouth. Other animals too. Other animals even breathe through their mouths even less than dogs. And it's pretty much if they just ran or if they're sick. Because when you run, your metabolic demand is really, really high. So you need to move a lot of air really quickly. And when I say run, I mean sprint full speed, like you're getting chased by a tiger for a mile. I don't mean go for a jog at 50%. Because that's when most people, even if they breathe through their nose at rest, which you should be breathing through your nose all the time at rest. When you sleep, when you're sitting at your desk, anything you're doing, you should be breathing through your nose. And during all low intensity exercise, during most moderate intensity exercise, and during some higher intensity exercise. So if you think about the mouth, it's really just a backup system. When I've spent everything and I have to move a lot of air quickly, then I go to the mouth. But I teach my athletes to quickly transition from breathing through the mouth, and as quick as they can, even during maximum high intensity exercise. You could watch some of my UFC fighters in between rounds. They're out there fighting trained killers in the cage on TV, and in between rounds, they're quickly transitioning from into breathing through the nose, because we've practiced this over and over again, and they understand the benefits of that from a performance perspective. So yeah, the mouth is not designed for breathing, and it's a very common breathing dysfunction. It's a really easy way to see if I watch people walk around, I could tell you. Another big thing about the mouth, by the way, is it triggers that shallow upper chest breathing. So you're talking about both of those dimensions of breathing that we mentioned, or 2 out of the 3, the biomechanical and the physiological, the chemical dimensions, are both significantly impacted by mouth versus nose breathing.
Wow. Let's talk about that physiological part real quick and look at our emotional state. Obviously, we've touched on this today, and a lot of this program is we're so sympathetically driven artificially all the time now. That meeting, that text message, those emails, way different than running from a fucking tiger, right? Way different. But our bodies are still, we can't change the world that we live in these days, and that's never going away. You and I ride on airplanes all the time. That's one of the most unhealthy things we could possibly do.
Right.
But with that being said, if that life isn't going away, we need to understand what's going on when we have poor breathing and we're constantly in this hypertonic state, and what is happening when we do fix that breathing and we're able to start bringing that down. Run us through a little bit about what those breathing, same thing with your fighters, mid-fight, or in between rounds, your nasal breathing, what's going on in there?
Yeah, so that sympathetic state creates stress. So increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. It basically, the whole system is designed to get you ready to fight that tiger or run away from that tiger. So it's going to shut down all the other systems that are not responsible for doing that. It's going to shut down your digestion. It's going to shut down even cognitive thought at a certain level of stress, because you don't need those things. Even your fine motor skills. This is one thing I work with. I work with a lot of special forces and military, law enforcement. These are guys, men and women, who need fine motor skills and complex motor skills at super elevated states of stress. As you know, anybody who's ever been in that state where you're just in so much fear or so much stress or so much anger where you literally can't function, your body won't function. It's because you've redlined. But we need to have tools that can bring us out of those states, and not just if you're, Navy SEALs that are landing on a helicopter and they got to go kill terrorists, because those are some of the, those are always the examples we give, because those are the people that work in such extreme situations. But what we do day to day has very similar impact on our lives. So, if I'm going
and we're way less trained for it.
Exactly. That's the problem. That's the problem, is we receive no training in it. So we don't have the tools, and we don't weigh it as high. We don't think about it as being as stressful, because we're not fighting we're not swimming with great whites and fighting terrorists. So we don't think about these things as the same level of stress. But like you mentioned, we're so connected to it. So what happens when we use the breathing the right way? Sorry, let's go back to the wrong way. When you're in those elevated states of stress, your breathing will match the stressful state. So you start to breathe faster to prepare yourself for that stress.
Yeah.
And the brain creates neural associations with that, with everything. If I start listening to a song and eating a certain food, and I do that every single day for the next year, I could put that song on or I start eating that food, and my brain I'll just start humming that song, because my brain has just created those neural associations. Same thing happens with our breathing and the state that we're in. So because it's so powerful to do that, if we get into these breathing states that are these more stress breathing patterns, it can trigger us into similar physiological stress states. So it can start to increase stress in the body. And again, I use the example, just start huffing and puffing really hard and do that 30 breaths and do that a couple of times. Your heart rate will increase, your blood pressure will increase, you'll start to feel heat in the body, you may start to get tension in all these breathing muscles. All of those things are triggering that stress response, because your body has created those neural associations with stress. So what we need to do is we need to hardwire that system the opposite direction. We need to start using the down regulation style breathing and getting those associated in the brain with states of rest, recovery, relaxation. And when we do that, then once we hardwire those systems, then we have those tools to use in the stressful states to get us out, or to just use at the end of the day. Because it takes us 3 to 5 hours typically to come down from a sympathetic activity. Let's say I'm sitting here banging out emails and I'm stressed out about it. When I shut my laptop, it isn't just, okay, I'm done, now I'm going to relax. And everybody who's worked ever in their life knows that. When you come home from a stressful day at work, you drive home, you're pissed off on the way home, you're stressed out in traffic, you get home, you get in a fight with your significant other because of some crap that happened at 2:00 this afternoon, because your body is still in that elevated state of stress. So we need something that can bring us down and get us into that state that we're supposed to be in all the time, which is that rest and digest state, that parasympathetic state. And that's where breathing, I think, is one of the most powerful tools, or this is one of the most powerful uses for breathing, because there's about 7 different triggers associated with breathing that are parasympathetic triggers, meaning they help us get into a state, that parasympathetic state.
Wow. Holy shit. Digestion, everything. Holy, breath touches everything. It's amazing. But like I said, you said it's the one thing that we can all start working on right now.
Yeah.
Where do we start? How do we, right now, these guys are going to be going through a couple, just a box breathing or some long exhales at night. What can we start doing right now as daily, whatever, without any real extra coaching to start this process?
Yeah, I will give you the great part too, also in these tips I'm going to give, is in all my research on breathing, no matter what area I'm focused in, breathing for special forces, breathing for yoga, breathing for spine patients, cancer patients, all these things, the more I've come across, the more I realize there's a lot of areas where people are disagreeing in things, but these 3 principles that I teach people are pretty much across the board agreed on, and they don't just influence one area. They may seem to work on one primary dimension of breathing, but when you fix it, they leak over into all the others, and it just creates a snowball effect. They're like these keystone habits that just trigger all these other great breathing habits. You know, it's kind of like exercise. People who start exercising typically also start sleeping better and eating better and feeling less stressed. So when it comes to breathing, the simple tips I give people, number one is a pre-tip. Anytime you can develop awareness of the breath, and I have measurables that we do, we have testing of some different things that we do for dysfunction. I've done this with myself and with other people where I've tested certain dysfunctions, not given them anything to do in terms of a protocol to follow that was aimed at fixing that dysfunction, but just gave them some tips on breathing and made them more aware of their breathing. And just by being more aware and correcting it with these simple tips, I saw improvements in all three dimensions of the breath.
Wow.
So number one, breathe through your nose as much as you possibly can, all the time. And when I say be aware, anytime you notice you're breathing through your mouth, go back and start breathing through the nose. It'll take time, just like everything. It'll be uncomfortable. You won't be able to do it during exercise. You'll feel like it's impossible to do when you're jogging and you feel like you're going to die. I promise you that the body will adapt to whatever you feed it the most. You haven't been feeding it this pattern for a long time, so it's going to take a little bit of time to adapt, but it adapts really quickly. So breathe through your nose as much as you possibly can. A little trick that I use, by the way, at night is a little mouth taping. There's these strips that we use where you put them on your lips. It's not duct tape. It doesn't tape your mouth shut, but it just helps to keep your lips shut because obviously you're not conscious of your breathing when you're asleep, but it helps you to breathe through your nose at night, which just that, I've given the mouth strips to people and had them do it for a week. And they're like, that completely changed my life. My anxiety's gone away. My shoulder pain went away. Whether that's placebo or not, I don't care because it costs
Doesn't matter.
It was an $11 box of mouth strips that they got.
Yet. Wow.
Yeah. So that's one. Breathe through your nose as much as you possibly can. Number two, breathe horizontally into the belly, into the ribs. So when you're doing the box breathing protocol that you have people doing, put your hands on your ribs, right in your sides, and breathe into your hands. Or you can even, one of my favorite things is take your phone cord, wrap it around your waist, not your waist, your ribs. And then as you breathe, as you inhale, think about expanding that phone cord. Mm-hmm. And as you exhale, pull it in a little bit closer. And the more change you can get in rib cage position, the better function you're getting of your diaphragm. So if you're doing a breathing protocol anyway, that's a really simple tip to use to make sure all those breaths are happening the right way. And then the third one is slow it down. The average person breathes, I said, about 10 to 14 breaths per minute. The optimal breathing to optimize all HRV, blood pressure, heart rate, and all systems of the body is about 5 to 7 breaths per minute. So we really need to basically cut it in half.
Wow.
So that when we start to slow it down, and that box breathing protocol is a great one, or just really simple balanced breathing. Breathe in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds. That's 10 seconds per breath, and that's going to be 6 breaths a minute. Really, really simple protocols. But the recommendation I give people to start developing some awareness is set a timer on your phone. Every 90 minutes it's going to go off and just say breath check. Spend 1 minute breathing through your nose into your belly and ribs, and people will fix their posture naturally, because when they go to breathe into their ribs, they're going to naturally sit up and fix their posture. So it's a little posture check too, and slow the breath down, breathing in that 5 to 7 breaths per minute. You start doing that a couple times per day, what you'll notice is that awareness carries over into many other areas. You start to notice how you're breathing when you're exercising. You start to notice when you're sitting in your car and your mouth starts to get dry and you're like, oh crap, I'm sitting here with my mouth open, panting like a dog for no reason. And you start to shut your mouth. And that's one of my favorite tips for people is shut your damn mouth and breathe. Because people remember it, you know?
Yeah.
So those are the simplest. And honestly, if you only remember one to start off, just close your mouth and breathe through your nose as much as you can. If that's the only thing you take away from this whole conversation, it will take you 25 steps in the right direction to start building a foundation. And then you can always learn the next piece after that.
Dude, that was amazing. Such great information, making it so simple. taking something that literally, guys, whether you continue on this program forever or not, breathing is the thing that we can all do. And I encourage all of you, no matter where you're at in your life, do this little thing right here. Just work on your breathing and take that away. And if the fitness part comes in later and you start working out, lifting, eating different, like you could probably argue to say that breathing is the gateway drug. And so, maybe that's where we should probably put, our most efforts. Like foam rolling is one of those things, and you guys have heard me talk about this. It's great. But if someone doesn't want to sit on a foam ball, essentially, and rub out, muscles, because it hurts, God, breathing is probably the best way to help drive some of that sympathetic tone and that tissue down. So, man, PJ, thank you so much for dropping some knowledge bombs with us, educating our crew. Guys, there's going to be a link to the XPT app right next to this video for you guys to download their app and go through your own journey with them. Check out PJ's stuff and XPT stuff. Go to one of their experiences. But this is just the gateway for you guys to start seeing that there's more to fitness than just trying to go lift heavier weights or run faster or go get your ass kicked, and that there's small things that we can all be doing every single day to start having a better relationship with our body, with our lifestyle, with the foods that we eat, and the health and performance that we ask from ourselves day in, day out. So start with your breathing, breathe through your nose, check out PJ and XPT Life. Dude, thank you so much for the time. Such a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye, bud.